Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Chu, Executive Vice President and Chief Curator at James Madison's Montpelier. Welcome to our conversation with Representative Abigail Spanberger. With this event, Montpelier is launching a new Constitution initiative, which my colleague Roy Young will explain in a moment. I will now introduce our speakers. U.S. Representative Abigail Spanberger is proud to represent Virginia's 7th Congressional District, which is comprised of 10 counties throughout Central Virginia, including Orange County, the home of Montpelier. Representative Spanberger began her career in public service, first serving as a federal agent with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, investigating money laundering and narcotics cases, then serving as a case officer with the Central Intelligence Agency, working counterterrorism and nonproliferation cases. In the House of Representatives, Abigail Spanberger serves on the U.S. House Committee on Agriculture and the U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Representative Spanberger resides in Glen Allen, Henrico County, Virginia, with her husband, Adam, and their 3 children. Roy F. Young II is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Montpelier Foundation. Roy most recently served as a business consultant to Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library in Delaware, and currently co-chairs the Historic House and Sites Network at the American Alliance of Museums. Prior to that, he was Vice President for Guest Experience at George Washington's Mount Vernon, developing a dynamic portfolio of experiences ranging from presidential, diplomatic, and cabinet level visits to robust engagement for school children. Prior to his time at Mount Vernon, Roy held leadership positions at Fallingwater and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and at the University of Arizona Museum of Art and Visual Archives. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Roy Young.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Congresswoman Spanberger. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming. Before we get started, I wanted to say a big thank you to the Montpelier team, who has worked so hard on this program, all of the programming for Madison's birthday, and really sort of a strong group of writers and producers and historians, led by Katie Crawford Lackey, who you will meet a bit later when she does questions and answers from staff members. Recently conceptualized, the Constitution Initiative is rooted in James Madison's belief that an informed and engaged populace is essential for a democratic republic. As the father of the Constitution, architect of the Bill of Rights, and 4th President of the United States, Madison played a leading role in the formation of our government. Yet, as a lifelong slaveholder, Madison also betrayed the ideals to which he devoted his life. To more deeply explore Madison's complicated legacy and the role of America's invisible founders, Montpelier has launched a new endeavor that we're calling the Constitution Initiative. Today, Montpelier uses its historical legacy to help people learn about the context and content of the Constitution, its successes and its failings, and how it continues to affect all of those living in the United States. The Constitution Initiative continues this tradition of telling a fuller, more accurate account of the past, while empowering audiences to put that knowledge into practice. We seek to inspire and empower people to become educated, engaged, and active participants in American democracy. Our goal is to enhance the public's understanding of the Constitution, not as a centuries-old legal document, but as a living framework that affects our everyday experiences. Active citizenship is at the heart of this project. Past Montpelier constitutional programs have excelled at providing historical context and information that for people to understand their founding document. Now we seek to take the next step, equipping Americans to take active steps to participate in their democracy. Abigail, at the beginning of each question that I have for you this evening, I have been given a Madison quote. And so I thought it would be a great way to sort of frame each question for you. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. That is James Madison writing to W.T. Barry, August 4th, 1822. Montpelier is well known for its role providing civic knowledge through its programming, and we're now looking not only to educate people, but also to inspire and empower them to become engaged and active participants in this great experiment, American democracy. In your experience as a civil servant, which I think is quite extensive, why is it important for people to be responsibly and actively engaged in democracy?
Well, I want to again thank you for having me join you today for this conversation. Throughout my time as a public servant, serving our country as a federal agent, as a CIA officer, and now as a representative of people throughout Central Virginia across 10 counties, I think what's been clear to me is that the strength of our nation comes from the engagement of our people. The more people are engaged, the more people feel ownership of our communities and our country, the better that is for the health of our democracy. And we see, certainly when it comes to voter engagement or voter turnout, really that's for the everyday citizen who works in the private sector or has chosen a path outside of public or government service. The point of engagement is typically through voting, through engaging in that way. And we see ebbs and flows in the amount of engagement that we do or don't have in our communities, local, state, and federal elections. And I have found through my time out meeting with constituents that the more people have a general awareness of what's happening around them politically or what their local representatives are doing, the more connected they feel to the community, the state, or even kind of the country overall in terms of federal engagement. And in a representative democracy, the more people who turn towards the bodies that are supposed to represent us, the discussion surrounding who are the people that we are as Americans, what is the future and the trajectory of our nation, the more fulsome that conversation is. Yeah.
So question 2 for you. Madison recognized that human behavior necessitated government. In 1833, he penned to an unidentified correspondent, "It has been said that all government is an evil. It would be more proper to say that the necessity of any government is a misfortune. This necessity, however, exists, and the problem to be solved is not what form of government is perfect, but which of these forms is least imperfect." Madison believed we should strive to create the best form of government. This is what he sought to do in drafting the Constitution, which balances inalienable rights with the consent of the governed. This is a key component of our democracy, a government by and for the people, one where politicians are responsive to the people. You're known for being responsive to your constituents' expectation on a regular basis. Can you tell me why you think it's important for congressional representatives to be responsive to their constituents?
Well, and first I want to start by saying upon my most recent visit to Montpelier, I was very struck during the tour where we spent time in the room where Madison had looked through books and historical references, trying to learn from what governments had been tried before, what philosophers had written about the ways to bring societies and countries along. And so I think that it's very interesting, the kind of the process of gathering information of how it is that we were going to, as a fledgling country, how it is that we were going to put ourselves on a trajectory with this notion of and by and for the people. And certainly when the House of Representatives was first created, and we initially saw that it was hyper localized, right? The number of people represented by one member of Congress was far less, far fewer than the 700 to 800,000 that so many of us represent now today. And in fact, over time, as the population grew in the United States, so too grew the House of Representatives, until just about a century ago, when we locked in at our number of 435 voting representatives, and then just started expanding with the growth. But really, we are supposed to be the House of Representatives. We are the people's house. And what that means is we are supposed to bring with us to Capitol Hill the voices of the people across our district. And to tactically do our jobs well, we have to be hearing from people kind of across the political spectrum, across the board, and hearing from business and hearing from individuals and local electeds and local county officials and nonprofit leaders, and kind of all of the elements of a society that makes a community strong are the voices that we should be carrying with us to Washington. Because when reflecting on that quote from Madison, certainly the idea of government is to create foundation and opportunity, and the roads that allow us to do commerce, the internet that helps us in this next generation of commerce and of education and of healthcare. When somebody falls or fumbles and falls on hard times, that there might be some level of support to help them kind of get back up and continue on. The fact that we choose to educate our nation's children as a factor that's an investment, not just in an individual child, but frankly in society at large and in the next generation of our workforce. These are all of the places where our government engages. And so to have a responsive government, during the pandemic, it was incredibly important for me to hear directly from small business owners who were struggling to keep their doors open, to keep their businesses afloat. Certainly there were massive shutdowns in the early days. And then what happens when some businesses start opening back up, but the customers aren't there? How do we make sure that when we're kind of going through this process, that in the end, these businesses that are such drivers of our community and our local economies are still open, right? That's a place where government stepped in, and we provided in federal dollars, billions of dollars to support to small businesses, to medium-sized businesses, to restaurants, to local venues, to some of the hardest hit businesses, because we recognized that this is a place where in this time of emergency, government can step in, because having them all lost to the pandemic down the road will negatively impact our economy. And so, those are the sorts of reasons that I need to hear from constituents directly. The experience of a family that's struggling to pay for their prescription drugs, the experience of the small business owner that, typically faces hurdles, but in a pandemic, they become sometimes insurmountable. These are the stories that drive the legislation that I work on, that drive the policy that I pursue. And that's what our representative government should be, responsive to the localized needs, because for every constituent I talk to who has a certain challenge, there's probably many more facing those same similar challenges. That if we were back in the old days where I was representing 30,000 people, maybe I'd hear all those stories. But at this point, recognizing that across our large constituency base, that as many of the stories and challenges that people are facing that I can hear, that's what helps me do my job.
So what methods do you employ? If I'm thinking about there's an issue in my community and I want to be heard, there's that one more thing that happens, as we're saying, especially during the pandemic. If I'm a person from any district, how do I get the attention of my representative?
So there's a variety of ways, and everybody does it slightly differently. First, calling your representative really does matter. We log all those calls. Writing your representative really matters. We log all those emails. And what we do is we pull them kind of by topic. And so we dig into, this is a topic that's of great importance, just because the number of people who are writing us about it or calling us about it, or these are particular stories that are unique, that that we really want to dive into, let's have a longer conversation with this constituent. So phone calls, emails, or real letters are actually really, really important to our level of responsiveness. Our office also sends out a weekly newsletter. Many congressional offices do, where from time to time we'll also solicit input back from constituents in the form of surveys, but it's meant to help people understand what it is that I'm doing week to week to support and on behalf of my constituents. But it's also an opportunity for people to give me feedback. Then, of course, my favorite aspect of engagement comes in the form of town halls. And I represent 10 counties across Central Virginia. And so among my early pledges was to do a town hall in all 10 of my counties. And we did that in my first year. It was fantastic because each community, each county has a different personality. And what was actually really amazing was to see some people from some communities travel to a different community within the district to participate in a town hall there, and see that movement across county lines, where sometimes some of the communities I represent don't have natural economic ties or don't have similarities, where that sort of cross-pollination doesn't typically happen on its own with any regularity. The pandemic has really thrown things kind of upside down, and so we've moved to doing telephone town halls where we'll call out to constituents. We also put all the information out online for people who want to call in. And it's interesting, Roy, because for me at first I thought, no, I want to do my town halls in person. I want to look face to face to people. That's what a representative should do. They get to ask their questions directly to me. We look into each other's eyes and I answer their question. But because of the pandemic, we had to, for health reasons, move to a version where we're on the telephone, and we also broadcasted out video. But it was really important to me that constituents continue to be the ones asking the questions. And so we'll patch people through, they'll ask questions. And that's been amazing because we'll have telephone town halls where there's thousands of constituents on the line. And certainly while our town halls were very well attended in person, there were not 1,000 people or thousands of people at our in-person town halls. And also I have thought about it, the fact that previously people would be traveling, maybe getting a babysitter, maybe bringing their kids, coming to meet us on a weeknight or on a weekend, there's a level of inconvenience that makes that a bit harder for some people. And so the telephone town halls have actually made it so that you can be stirring your pasta while you're listening to your representative. You listen for what you might want to hear and then you click, or it's available online, maybe go back and listen to it afterwards. And so, certainly as we're starting to plan for in-person events again, just sort of based on the fact that we're getting to a place where, I feel that we can responsibly bring a room full of people together to talk to their representative. I'm still going to want to continue doing those telephone town halls because there's an accessibility to it that certainly is valuable. So, and then other than that, it's being out and about at events, and not necessarily events that are where people expect to see me, right? It's community days, it's local local events. We have our constituent service reps that will go out and put a table up at different fairs and events as well, so that people know that this is our job. If you're having trouble with a federal agency, with the VA, with the Social Security Administration, call our office. And just that presence in the community, I think, is incredibly important to maintain. Again, we represent so many more people than when the founders have created the House of Representatives, but we can try and be as on the ground as we possibly can be, and that's what we endeavor to do.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I'll add something that you said the other day, which is that it's always good to remind people that no matter how they voted, you represent everybody in your district. And so I think that's just important for people to know as they move forward, that no matter what district they live in, their representative is doing their work.
And I think, thanks for bringing that up. I did say that the other day, because the reality is that at times we will have constituents call the office and say, well, I didn't vote for it. And our team is wholly trained to say, that doesn't matter, right? She represents you. This office is here to serve you. What do you need? And so it's totally appropriate for anyone listening, no matter who your representative is across Virginia or elsewhere. This is our job, is to represent people. And in fact, it's important to hear from the people who agree with me, the people who disagree with me, and everybody in between. And that's a important, I think, when we're talking about engagement of citizens, it's important for citizens to speak up and make their voices heard. And hearing that balance, and when we get our reports in terms of all the calls that are coming in, or all of the emails that are coming in, or letters that are coming in, like, that informs me what's on the minds of people, in addition to being out and about in the community and town halls.
Madison recognized the importance of learning from the past. And as you very aptly quoted, he searched while up in his study through many other forms of government, past forms of government. He studied from the ancient confederacies of Greece and the Holy Roman Empire, the Swiss Confederation, the United Providence of the Netherlands, and many other forms of government. Madison concluded that the past should enlighten us on the future. Knowledge of history is no more than anticipated experience. So Madison saw the value of studying the past, and it was this study that informed the writing of the Constitution and the structure of our government, as you referenced before. So tell us, what have you learned about the past that's informed your style of leadership? And why is understanding the past important in being an informed participant in democracy?
I think there's a couple different things that are important there. One, understanding the history of our country gives us a fulsome understanding of the sacrifices that people have made for our country, to create our country, to affirm our country's values. Recognizing the history of our country shows us the progress that we've made as a people. And you touched on this in your opening comments. We are a nation built on an idea. We are an experiment of what can be. And that experiment goes through iterations. That progress is what we should want to see in our society. And even the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of liberty, right? The pursuit of something is a path that we are on. And so I think that it's important that we recognize where we've been so that we can celebrate the progress that we've made, but also recognize that indeed progress is an ever evolving, ever kind of forward moving path for our country. And so celebrating how far we've come also is a call for us to continue towards an ever more perfect union. And that's one piece of it when it comes to just our own nation's history, but looking at the history of other countries that have struggled to strengthen their democracy, reading the writings of other thinkers about how can the voice of people, everyday people, be part of a government, understanding examples of leadership and examples of courage and strength that have existed throughout history, be it in just recent years or much lengthier, I think helps to inform us of what we, the people are capable of, what we can aspire to, how we can look at our hopes and our dreams and our aspirations as a people, as a community, as a country, and kind of directionally recognize that, we've been somewhere, we're going somewhere, and that there's a bright path, but we have to recognize that sometimes that's hard, and sometimes there's hurdles, and sometimes it's uneasy and it's uncomfortable. But if we look at our history, we've seen that. Our history, and then the history, of many places around the world that have kind of faced challenges and worked on that path towards progress.
Agree. I also think it's interesting that you've made my job so easy here. almost leading me to the next question. But I would say, just, personally, I'm always amazed when I listen to others and I learn from things that I read. I'm often taken that it does change and shape my thoughts. And I think that the way you lay out the approach that you have to being in the community, I think it really must, I'm sure there are challenges, but I think it really must help inform you, when you're in Congress.
I think that there's something that we can always learn from others, either writers or thinkers or philosophers or historians or our neighbor down the street, right? Or children and people in the community around us. If we're looking for those lessons or if we're receptive to them. And there's a very silly story that I'll tell. Hopefully you don't find it totally irrelevant, but I have a 10-year-old daughter who somewhat recently said, Mommy, I want to be one of those jelly bean families. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, those families that when you go to their house, they have a jar of jelly beans. I still don't know who she's talking about. I said, okay, well, what do we have to do to become a jelly bean family? And she said, well, we got to get a jar and we got to buy jelly beans. And I didn't think anything of it, but I said, okay, fine, let's buy a jar. Let's buy jelly beans. I got her jelly beans for Christmas and got her a giant jar of jelly beans to become a jelly bean family, or whatever that means. But I had strangely sort of thought about how simplistic, but also how serious it is that, she's saying there's this type of household I want to be, and I want to be this household, so let's make it so, right? And it's, of course, far easier to buy a jar of jelly beans and have them in the front of your house than it is to say, like, this is the path towards progress, or this is the sort of kind of system and community that I want to live in. But at the same time, there's something very simplistic about the message of, well, if you want to be that, be it, do it, make it happen. And I think about it sometimes in a funny way about the sort of challenges that we face as a country, that there's an element where, we want our democracy to be stronger. We want people to be more engaged civically. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. And sometimes, when we're learning from people, it doesn't have to be the great philosophers or writers of our time. Sometimes some of the most simplistic messages that can have meaning can come from people all around us, including kids.
Thank you. I'm not sure why I'll share this right now, but I read an inspirational quote this morning that said, do less, be more. And I like this whole idea of listening and letting other people inform you and such. Okay, question 4. I had to look up, make sure I was in this right question. We are teaching the world the great truth that governments do better without kings and nobles than with them. James Madison to Edward Livingston, July 10th of 1822. We know that the original Constitution did not include everyone. How can we work to continue its expansion to include all of those who call this country home? And again, I think we're leading right to the perfect place for these conversations.
Well, I think, notably, we're speaking today because I'm a member of Congress representing 10 counties across Virginia. And at the time that he would have written those words, it would be inconceivable that I would be a member of Congress or, even have the right to vote for one. And this gets back to what we were talking about before, which is the more we're clear on the fact that they're in this kind of experiment that is our nation, we have been imperfect. We have excluded people. We have had a history that is something that is kind of less than full of pride, but we continue to do better and be better. Like that, I think, is central to the American experiment. And it's on all of us to find places where we can continue to improve how we treat each other, continue to improve how we engage each other, continue to improve. If you think there's something that could be better about our country or our community, well, speak up, but speak up with an idea, right? What is the solution? What is the problem, right? Let's identify problems and then get to that next phase of pursuing it, a solution. And so I think that we should look at advocacy, be it advocacy related to an issue, advocacy related to politics. Engagement of people in our system should strengthen our system. Engagement of people who have lives far outside of the political realm or far outside of the governmental realm is in fact what brings perspectives in, because this notion of you have a king, you have an autocracy, you have just a select group of people who are running things, and they don't have the input of people, of teachers and doctors and restaurant workers and small business owners, and the whole spectrum of people that are foundational to the ongoing aspects of our society. And so that's why within our democratic republic, the more voices that make themselves heard through advocacy or through voting, the more opinions kind of come in, the more ideas come in, the stronger that we are, because we never wanted to be a nation where just one person is driving everything. And certainly at the early stages of our nation, like the group of people that got to drive things was smaller, and we have expanded and expanded and expanded. And we can always do better and be better as a country and as a nation. But that takes engagement of all people to recognize, what could be better, and then how do we take that next step towards this ever evolving example of what a democracy can be and what our republic should be.
It's amazing how many of these people who didn't have rights have gotten their rights, have been given their voices in my lifetime. Okay, the advice nearest to my heart and deepest in my convictions is that the union of the states be cherished and perpetuated. James Madison, his advice to my country in April of 1836. At Montpelier, we are dedicated to interpreting Madison's complicated legacy, which includes his prioritization of the Union above all else. And this is a legacy that has been negotiated and renegotiated, as we spoke about, over 235 years since the US Constitution was ratified. There have been moments in history when the fate of the Union was in jeopardy. What do you see for the future, Abigail, of this country and Madison's vision for democracy?
Well, I think that we're facing some challenging times in our nation. We've seen incredible levels of division, of polarization, of kind of othering within our communities based on, at times, political titles. And I think that weakens us as a nation. The strength of the United States from its foundation was that it was this kind of grouping of communities that chose to be a country that chose to put their, to go in on this experiment together, despite their differences or because of their differences. And so I think that at times when we talk about, this state's different from that state, and this is a coastal state, and this is a Midwestern state, and this is a blue state or a red state, I think there's an element there where those differences are actually our strength if we choose to make them. Those differences are strengths, right? The different economies, the different the different mindsets of people, the different kind of priorities at times really should be a strength for our country. because you look at different industries that exist in different places throughout the country, right? That's the economic driver of the United States, right? We've got banking in New York, we've got agriculture, and very distinct agriculture, along our southern states versus our Great Plains states, right? But all of those things together, yes, they're different, but when we put them together, that's actually the strength of our country. The fact that we have people across the political spectrum, in theory, is supposed to make us stronger, right? When I'm advocating for policy and somebody who disagrees with me challenges me, that's supposed to make me stronger, because if I can't justify the policy I'm pursuing, or if someone doesn't challenge me and say, well, what about this or what about that, then I'm maybe missing the opportunity to make my policy stronger. And if I can't defend it, then is it a policy that I should be pursuing on behalf of my constituents in the larger country? And I truly believe that this push and pull of ideas is meant to make us, and historically has made us, stronger. But in recent years, it has felt far more that disagreement was a problem. Meanwhile, disagreement is helpful and can be actually the fodder for growth. And so I think that, when we look at even events such as the January 6th insurrection, I think there's real reason to say that there are deep problems and deep divisions that exist within our nation that we have to address. And that culmination of an event where you would have people coming to the Capitol, and I was there, beating police officers with American flags, like that's heart-wrenching reality that we have reached, one that cannot be accepted as normal. And then that next step is, yes, there must be accountability for the acts of violence, but then we also have to look towards the future of how do we get to a place where political differences, again, are points of strength, and where people who disagree with us are there to challenge us and make us, make us stronger, make us think through our own positions, and perhaps, make us, at times change our positions. And so I think that there's a great amount of opportunity, because I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm deeply passionate about the fact that we are just an extraordinary nation built on an extraordinary idea. But we need to have people sort of united in that, right? That our country is a special place. It has an important role in the world, and that we should all want it to be better and stronger, and that we need to be united in that goal. We might have different ideas of how we get there. We might have different ideas of how we pursue this policy or that policy, but united in the fact that, like, we're the United States of America. What's our path towards the future? It should be a bright one. It should be a good one. And let's have that competition of ideas, as opposed to this division that, at times in our history, when we haven't recognized the value of our diversity, and we haven't recognized the value of kind of the broad experience of Americans, that we've been weakened by that.
Thank you, Representative. That was a great tingle moment. I would just invite you one more time to grab as many of your colleagues on both sides of the aisle and join us at Montpelier and experience the power of our place in perhaps bringing together some of those conversations. I'm going to turn the questions now over to Katie Crawford Lackey, who's our public historian, and she's going to share with you a few questions that were top of mind for our staff here at Montpelier. Abigail, thank you for joining us. I'll be still here, but not speaking directly with you.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I very much enjoyed hearing this dialogue between the two of you, particularly around this idea of responsible civic action. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to present several of the questions that Montpelier staff have submitted to you. So the first one is asking you about how you became interested in public service.
I have always been interested in public service. I grew up in a household where my mother was a nurse and my father was career law enforcement, first a local police officer and then a federal agent. And they told us throughout our childhood, the oldest of three sisters, that there's no greater calling than service to country. And indeed, for the new year in 2000, actually, my parents wrote the three of us this letter, and the 10 lessons for our daughters, and put that on paper, that there's no higher calling than service to country. And so I always knew that I had intended to follow my father's footsteps and serve our country. The kind of chosen path for me was one that would allow me to unite my interest in answering questions and understanding different ideas and cultures and people and using languages. And so while I got a start in law enforcement, following directly in my father's footsteps, ultimately I knew the path I wanted to pursue was to continue on to CIA and to be able to help answer really hard questions that would drive policy that would keep Americans safe. And it was just something that I always wanted to do. Yeah.
Thank you for talking about kind of your personal journey into public service. What advice would you give others who are interested in getting involved in the decision-making process in their own communities?
One of the things that I've heard a lot from constituents along the way, or people when I've just met people kind of out and about, is, people will doubt their own ability to engage. And I've heard it particularly from younger voters or from younger people who might not yet be voting age, who will say things like, oh, well, I don't know much about, and then a topic, or, oh, well, I'm not really sure about this. And they'll doubt themselves. And what I've said to people in that circumstance is, the whole point of our representative government is that you don't need to know everything about everything. You should endeavor to understand how our government functions and be engaged with who you're choosing to represent you. And frankly, look for the issues that do matter to you and maybe choose your representatives based on that. But walking away from our system because you don't have all the answers is not what I'd argue is not what our founders intended. I have the job of diving deep on issues of policy. I have the job of figuring out how do we solve these problems through legislation, or what engagement from a congressional office can help constituents. I also have a team of people who help me do that job. And so I think the advice that I would have for people kind of across Virginia and across the country is that everybody's voice matters. And if everybody sort of stepped away and said, well, I don't know this much, and I'm going to exit the conversation about civic engagement, after a while, you don't have very many people at the table. And so I think that sometimes it's important just to tell your story, or just to raise your issue, or just to recognize that, our responsibility to be engaged citizens doesn't mean that we need to know everything about everything, but it means that we need to engage. We need to value the right to vote that we have, because people have died for that right throughout, certainly throughout our nation's history and far beyond that. And also find the things that matter to you, to each individual. And so different things can motivate us to get involved in our communities, be it with nonprofit advocacy or engagement, or at the local level in the political sense, or the state level, or the federal level. And all of that engagement matters, right? The stronger community is, the better it is for our democracy, be that in the political sense or in the community and civic engagement sense.
Thank you. Yes, I particularly appreciate your point that everyone's voice matters. And I think that's something we strive to do at Montpelier, is kind of tell the story of all those, past and present. So I really appreciate that. And I like this idea of telling your story and finding these entry points into civic participation. You mentioned voting, for example. And I think that's one of the things our staff members are curious about as well. Specifically, you mentioned voting rights being kind of this bedrock principle to our democracy, particularly in regard to civil rights and racial equity. So why is this issue of access to voting rights a priority to you?
Voting rights is a priority because the more people who vote, the more people who feel heard, who are heard, the better it is for the strength of our democracy. And throughout our nation's history, we have seen kind of egregious omissions and exclusion from the right to vote because it's a powerful right. It's our way of advocating for something. It's our way to demonstrate what we care about based on who or what we vote for, if it's a person or if it's a referendum issue. And so recognizing how powerful our right to vote is, which is why throughout history, there's been efforts to deny people that right. That's why we have to continue to advocate to ensure that every person has not only the right to vote, but the ability to actually exercise that right. And throughout history, we've seen hurdles that have been put before people meant to impede their ability to exercise what is their right. And so from my perspective, every person who can use their voice by casting a ballot strengthens us, right? And it's an exercise in having more people be able to tell their story, more people be able to kind of position, firmly show what matters to them by the votes that they cast. And voting rights becomes an issue of equality, of equity, of fairness, because our society has changed and ebbed and flowed. And there are still hurdles that many states are putting in the way of people's ability to exercise that right. It's why we had the Voting Rights Act in the first place. It's why the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized with broad bipartisan support multiple times. Frankly, it's why I continue to work for us in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. The House of Representatives have done it, but the Senate is the challenge to authorize the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2021, I believe is the actual title of the bill, because we have to recognize that there will always be hurdles. There will always be people who want to perhaps limit who can use that incredibly powerful right to vote. And we have to be wary of that, because the more we siphon off or make difficult or create hurdles to people's ability to vote, the more limiting we are as a society. And our strength is in the incredible diversity of opinions and ideas and priorities and experience that exists in our country. And if we start trying to systematically exclude certain people based on who they are, or where they live, or what they look like, or what their race is, or what their employment background is, or all of these things, we start to funnel down who's bringing their voices to the table. And that I believe very deeply weakens us, because our strength is in the vibrancy that is the United States.
You alluded to this throughout the conversation earlier. What do you think Madison's legacy is?
This is an interesting one. I certainly, telling this to the historian at Montpelier makes me a little bit nervous, but I'll say from an everyday citizen, right? That's my perspective. I happen to represent Madison's hometown in Congress, but from the perspective of someone who's endeavored to kind of understand what drove some of our founding fathers, I think Madison's legacy is that he seemed to recognize he didn't have all the answers. He sought information and guidance from history, from others, from people. He recognized the strength of differing opinions. And I'll even go back to my visits to Montpelier, where you all talk about the sort of events and the dinners that the Madisons would host, where they would bring people in and they would kind of bicker and debate and talk through these vibrant dinners. And I know that seems simple, but at the same time, the intentionality of bringing people of differing opinions together around dinner, and as if I remember my tour correctly, squeezing them into this close dinner table, which Dolly Madison was famous for, right? Like there's an intentionality of saying, we're going to gather around the table, we're going to debate ideas, and we're going to potentially learn from each other. And certainly it's a very human thing. And I think that sometimes we view our founding fathers as these mythical people, but I think there's an important legacy that he was a man who read a lot and wanted to learn because he knew he didn't have all the answers, and then wanted to learn from people, not just in history, not just great philosophers, not just the strength of countries and kingdoms and places that came well before his time, but that he wanted to learn from the people around the dinner table. And I think that that is the legacy that I'll take away. And if I got that wrong, I'll be back to Montpelier so you can tour me around other things.
Not at all. That was incredibly on point. And I think a very appropriate view of what his legacy is. And in wrapping up this conversation tonight, I want to thank the Congresswoman for joining us. This really marks an exciting moment for us at Montpelier as we continue to more deeply explore the Constitution, Madison's complicated legacy, and the role the enslaved community played in the founding of America. And this initiative is really an opportunity for us to inspire and empower people to become educated, engaged, and active participants in American democracy. So we encourage our viewers to make their voices heard and become more involved in their communities. And of course, come visit us at Montpelier, and please check out our webpage for more information about upcoming events. Thank you.